Hello everybody, I'm Hazel. Welcome back to my channel All About Ice Cream. This week's theme was rich and bold, and I'll be honest, I didn't know exactly what I was going to make for it until this morning. I'm still not entirely sure it fully meets the brief, but it was as close as I could get. So this is going to be, again, a custard ice cream, but a richer custard than the one that I made for the chocolate ice cream last week. It does mean that I'm still not showing you my general custard base. I think if I stick with my current plan for next week, we more or less do that next week. I say more or less because the cream ratios are slightly different, but only a little bit. And I'm going to be flavouring this one with allspice. I just have a mixture of it here. You can, of course, buy spices and mix them up in whatever amount you like. I'm going to start with the eggs for this one. The reason this is a richer custard base is that it includes both the yolk and a little bit of the white, and then they get frothed up a little bit. The amounts were slightly tricky, so it ends up as 15% egg yolk, which is relatively straightforward. That's actually similar to my usual custard base as well. And it means you just end up using one egg yolk per 100 grams of mixture that you're making. We also want 5% egg white, and that was the harder bit to get in there. I worked it out in an easy-ish way, but it means you do have to make it in amounts of 700 grams. So if you use 6 yolks and then a whole egg, the amounts work out. But you can't really do that if you want to make 1,000 grams of the mixture, because you end up with an awkward amount of egg whites that you have to put in there. So if you make 700, 1,400, 2,100, it all works out fine. The first bit of this is just going to be me cracking eggs. So what I'll talk about instead, because you don't really need me to talk about eggs again, we did that last week, is I will talk about the spices that are in my allspice mixture. So the reason I'm using allspice for a start is the recipe for that I'm basing this on just called for spices. It wasn't specific about which ones they were, but there are a few that would have been historically considered to be the spices that you use. My mixture is of, just trying to get that a little bit off there. My mixture is of cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove. So I'll talk about the cinnamon first. Cinnamon is an ancient spice. It was known in ancient Egypt. The Roman Empire made use of cinnamon. It was making it over to Europe via the markets of Alexandria and into Italy and Venice. But what wasn't really known was where it came from. There were rumours about where it came from. They included things like Arabia, where cinnamon birds used the sticks in their nests, and it was guarded by winged serpents, apparently. And then the other ones include that it was fished up from the Nile, or at least the source of the Nile, at the end of the world. But it's not until about, I think, the 1200s, roughly, when you start getting credible sources talking about where vanilla is coming from. And they are pointing towards what we would now know as India and Sri Lanka. Is that split? No, it hasn't split. So that's my 3 egg whites in that cup. Remember, I saved the whites in amounts of 3s. I've also got a lot of egg white over my hands so that I can easily make macaroons with it at a later stage. Where do I get up to in spices? Yes, we've got it being mentioned in the likes of India and Sri Lanka. So the Mediterranean markets had the monopoly on cinnamon. That one did split. That's not good. Get that little bit of white off there. No, I really don't want any yolk to go in there. It's fine for the ice cream if it splits. What you don't want is the egg yolk to go into the white if you want to use it for anything. And when cinnamon was controlled by the markets in Venice, they had a monopoly on it. But there were geopolitical changes going on in the region at the time. which meant, well, it was disrupting the supply of the cinnamon. That didn't split, but the shell came out quite badly there. It was disrupting the supply of the cinnamon, and it was one of the factors that prompted a lot of the European powers to go searching for their own routes into Asia. And from there you end up with the colonial system growing and a lot of bloodshed for spices and flavours. That is my 6 egg yolks. Cinnamon in particular originally went with the Portuguese. It's always the same ones when it comes to Asia, by the way. It's the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the British. So cinnamon originally went with the Portuguese before the Dutch became in control. No, the Dutch didn't come in control. That's a different story. The Dutch were competing with a related species in the Philippines until, remember, this is my whole egg, so that just goes straight in there, until they got control of Sri Lanka in, I think when did they get control of Sri Lanka, mid-1600s somewhere. And then the British were growing cinnamon they had got from somewhere, not entirely clear where, in Kerala, which is now part of India, until they themselves got control of Sri Lanka at the end of the 1700s. So the recipe just calls to whisk these. Beat them well, I think was actually the wording used. It's not going to froth up like stiff white peaks if it was just the egg whites. The presence of fat will prevent that. But the idea is just to get it a little bit of air in there. And so cinnamon, therefore, had been used for many, many years in European cooking. By the time these recipes were being written, it was not some new exotic spice. It was just the ways of getting it that were changing over time. Nutmeg and cloves are similarly ancient. They also follow quite a similar path. They were both grown on Indonesian islands. So I think the wider islands are called the Maluku. My apologies if I've not pronounced that correctly. And that's where cloves were quite well spread across all of the Maluku Islands. Not cinnamon, nutmeg restricted itself to the Banda Islands. And much like, is that whisked enough? Yeah, I think that'll be enough. And much like the cinnamon, it was known in ancient times, so it had been traded within the Indian Ocean trade networks. Certainly known about in sort of the 1500 BC. And it was also already going into Europe because it went into the likes of India, therefore travelled overland, ended up into the Venetian markets as well. It wasn't until 1500s, I think, the Portuguese started dabbling in the Indonesian islands, but they never really had control over it. It was the Dutch who fought for them. They decimated the native populations. They got a monopoly on the nutmeg, but they couldn't get a monopoly on the cloves because it was already too widespread. And for years, the Dutch were the only ones controlling where the nutmeg came from. The British took advantage of the Napoleonic Wars to get control of those islands in 1810 to 1814, I think, until they were handed back in a treaty. But by that point, the British had dug up the nutmeg trees, shipped them off to their own colonies, and were growing them overseas by then, and therefore ended the Dutch monopoly on nutmeg. As I say, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of heartache for some spices. So we've got our eggs beaten together. We then want the cream. Did I not get the cream out? I did not get the cream out. Never mind, it's only in the fridge. It's probably not a bad thing for it to stay in a fridge. So this one's easy on amount of cream. It's just 25% of each. So in a 700 gram recipe, that will come down to 175 grams. So start off with the single cream. It'll be the majority of both of these pots. I would also probably benefit from having my scales there. Okay. So 175 will be the majority of these pots. I get it in 250 gram pots. That's going to go, I think, the cream amount there. That's 174. Tiny bit more. Not much though. That takes it to almost exactly 175. And that was a single. It doesn't really matter because it's the same amount of each. I don't know why my single cream always feels thicker than my whipping cream. I know it isn't, but when I shake it, the whipping cream seems to incorporate a little bit better. So another 175 of the whipping cream. $176, that's fine. It's meant to be a rich ice cream. And a bit like the chocolate recipe from last week, this is another one that uses the syrup mixture. This one actually is a 50-50 split though, rather than the one last week which weighted it towards the sugar. So this recipe needs 30% of syrup, so 210 grams. You can make a syrup and add it as a syrup. It's probably easier just to put 105 grams of water and 105 grams of sugar, which is what I will do. I do actually have a jug this time rather than trying to pour it from a bottle last time. So 105. Try not to go too far up on the water. This is quite a water heavy recipe because obviously we add a bit more by having the egg whites rather than just the yolks. That's my 105 of water and my 105 of sugar. There's going to be a bit in there. I thought I'd reset it rather than turned it off. I'm not too disappointed if it ends up a little bit sweeter. I do quite like sweet foods. 105. There we go. And then it's just a case of stirring it together to make a custard. I will just turn on my extractor fan and I'll try not to whisk in front of the camera. I'll try and actually reach around it to whisk. It does end up a fairly pale coloured ice cream, this one. Start to fill there. And then just add a little bit of the allspice. So there are no weights given for the spice amount here. I'm probably just going to put in a little bit on a spoon. I'm going to go for about that much. They're all quite powerful flavours, so you don't want to end up making it too much, even though the theme is bold. There's good bold and then there's bad bold. The original recipe for this is just down as royal ice cream. I don't know whether it's because it's a bit richer that makes it royal, or if it was because it ended up with a lot of mixed peels in it to make it look like it had been jewelled. I didn't really like that. I'm not a fan of, well, as you know, I'm not a fan of textures generally in ice cream, but I'm very much not a fan of peel anyway. There's so many things that I don't eat at Christmas. Christmas cakes, puddings, that's part of them. I don't like mince pies. I don't actually know if I would have preferred mince pies if they had been... No, it won't be a custard jar. I just want to see if that's enough spice. It's a little bit low for me. A tiny amount more. I don't know if I'd have been more fond or less fond of mince pies when they actually have proper mince in them. I'm tempted to say probably not. I could always make some. See what they taste like. That could be interesting. Wouldn't really fit the theme of ice cream, but I've been threatening you with macarons and panna cotta, so I could also make actual minced meat mince pies. Now, for an ice cream that does end up tasting quite rich, the custard of it is very thin. It does still do the draw a line in the back of a spoon, but it takes a little bit longer to get there. and it often froths because there's also quite a lot of protein in this ice cream. So froth is created by proteins unraveling, and egg yolks don't have an awful lot of protein, but egg whites certainly do. In fact, they're almost basically nothing but protein and water. Froth it. It's actually probably more or less there. Yeah, I think we've got there. Remember, you don't need to go wild with making a custard. This doesn't need to fully thicken. We're not going to be pouring it on anything. We just want it to be together. Just do a tiny little whisk more. Now, it does say to strain it. I'm not entirely sure why. But I generally do strain most of my ice creams at some point. So it makes no real difference to me if I strain it now or if I strain it later. There was the whisk making, not the whisk, the sieve making its appearance. So this one should pass through fairly easily. There's nothing in there to get caught in the sieve, really. There we go. Do I push the froth through? I might push the froth through. Let me push the froth through. And this one did catch a little bit. I shouldn't have done the extra whisk at the end. But as I said last time, it doesn't make an awful lot of difference. Maybe that's why it says to sieve it, because they know that this one will end up scrambling a little bit. Not really scrambling, more like coalescing. There we go. And then that can just chill for a few hours. It probably, what time is it? It probably will end up doing an overnight chill. This one. And I shall see you back here tomorrow to put it through the ice cream machine and make it into the actual ice cream. It's almost time to churn the ice cream now. The machine's been pre-chilling for a few minutes. I'm just going to lightly whisk the mixture. I was going to do this in the stand mixer and then strain it, but because I ended up straining it yesterday, it doesn't need to be strained again. And I didn't really want to dirty the stand mixer just for a brief re-whisking. So I'll just do that by hand, just to recombine everything. And then just pour it in and get it churning. On the swirly ball. It's got quite an unusual colour. It's almost a pale brown colour, I suppose, from the spice. I wasn't expecting it to change too much. Never mind. I think it's nice when they get a little bit of colour anyway. You often find a lot of homemade ice cream ends up 50 shades of beige. So that will then churn for, I don't actually know how long this one will churn for. I'll keep an eye on it and see you back here once it's finished. It's churned quite nicely, this one, and I just tasted a little bit of it. It came out quite creamy, so maybe all the extra effort was worth it. All the extra effort of beating the eggs. I think that's an acceptable amount of effort. So there it is on the paddle of the ice cream machine. It's interesting creaminess. This has no more cream, no higher butterfat content. And yet what I've not done, and what I still probably would do at some point, is make the same ice cream using this base and my regular custard base to see if it actually is any different. But just on tasting this one, it tasted really creamy. Probably because there's a little bit more air, although the air will have been knocked out of it by this stage. It's churned for quite, did it turn for? That comes to 26. I put it in there at 55. More or less 30 minutes then. Just perhaps a little bit longer than I was expecting it to, but I didn't chill it down for very long. I'm just going to get my bigger scoop out. Just makes it easier. Sometimes a lot of the ice cream sticks to the paddle, and then the smaller scoop is the easier one. It's easier to get it out of the bowl with the bigger scoop. I think that's made just the right amount for these pots. So when I was getting this pot out, I counted up how many I have. And very frustratingly, I'm going to run shy on the year by about 2. And because I suspect I know what Father Christmas is bringing me, I'm getting fancy ice cream containers for next year. I didn't want to buy another set of 20 of these. But 2, I'm going to run shy by 2. Actually, was it 2 or was it actually 1? It might even have been 1, which is even more annoying. I get a little bit more in there. I don't think I can comfortably get a little bit more in there. So I've just called this Allspice ice cream. I don't really know what else to call it. And I'll go and put that into my freezer. And see you back here tomorrow for the testing. And with a few days delay due to lots of different life things, it's now time to try the Allspice ice cream. I can't really put into words why I'm not that enthusiastic about this one. And not because that's stuck together a lot. Not because I don't think it's going to be nice. In fact, I know it's going to be nice. I've already made it more or less before and it was nice. And maybe that's why I'm not that enthusiastic about it. And it's perfectly nice, exactly as I predicted. It's quite a nice one to have around near Christmas time. It is quite a warming flavour. I once said to a friend of mine that a flavour wasn't a summer flavour of ice cream. And she said something along the lines to me of all flavours are summer flavours of ice cream. Summer is their prime time. I disagree. I think there are some flavours that suit other seasons better. And just because it's not sunny outside doesn't mean write ice cream off. I suppose my thing with this is I've made it more or less before. And B, I have regrets over it. I wish I had used whole spices rather than the spice mix. But it's fine. It just didn't enthuse me, this one. It's perfectly nice, though. And I will be keeping that because that will probably come in handy over the next few weeks as we enter into December and getting closer and closer to Christmas. Next week's ice cream, do I already know what I'm doing for it? I know how I'm making it. I've not necessarily decided what flavour I'm making it, but I know how I'm making it, and that will make more sense when you see the video and the thing for next week. Until then, looking forward to seeing you back here.